there's no binary in grief. There's everything and you can be bawling your eyes out and then laughing 2 minutes later. You know, the really challenging thing is that we hope that people could kind of read our minds and show up for us exactly how we want, but nobody else is in our brain. And even people who really want to be there and have the capacity to support you are probably still going to need some guidance in what that looks like and how to show up.
I was convinced that there was an anger day where we really focused on processing anger and what that looked like. And I was convinced that I would spend that day thinking about a particular current event in my family with a sibling that is so frustrating. And I was like, oh, this is like, this person's probably going to come up and I'm going to like let out all this anger and I can go back and handle the situation with more empathy and understanding and care. And what ended up coming up was like my high school boyfriend. Hey, Katy, how are you today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for joining me on the Well podcast. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I have been following your grief journey for, I guess, almost a year and a half now. And I'm really excited to speak to you a little bit about what this process has looked like for you. I know that for those of you that don't know, Katy lost her husband suddenly a year and a half ago, Gavin. And you have turned to poetry and started a Instagram account and a Stack Hub. I know you have a weekly newsletter?
It's pretty sporadic, but it's funny. I just put like a whole thing on this yesterday about like kind of like giving ourselves permission to be more cyclical beings and not be so sort of like, I need to post every week. I need to, when there's nothing to say, there's nothing to say. So I'm very much kind of leaning more into that, like, just, when I'm in a like process of sort of like flow and output, then there will be things. And when I'm not, then there won't.
I love that. I think everyone puts a lot of pressure on themselves nowadays, and especially with social media and content and showing up and all that kind of stuff. But I totally align with that. I think if it's so much more organic when you're doing it, when it feels right to do it as opposed to forced yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So why don't we start by kind of telling the listeners a little bit about your journey, where it all started, what happened, share whatever it is you feel comfortable sharing or what feels right for you today, in regards to this really tragic event that happened. I'm really sorry.
Thank you. Yeah. So I feel like, the sort of like really backstory of it is that, this was not my first encounter with close loss or grief. I lost my dad very suddenly when I was 5. And so my entire childhood, my entire life has basically been kind of navigating grief and dealing with close loss. So, March 30th, 2023, I lost my husband, Gavin, very suddenly and unexpectedly. And, I feel like there were so many things that losing my dad as a 5-year-old, I just had no tools or language or permission for how to navigate that grief, how to deal with it. And that was something I had already kind of started to unpack in therapy and through different kind of meditation and yoga and practices. And it was, I think, like 2020, COVID was really kind of the like tipping point where I was like, there's a lot happening here that I just need to start kind of like unpacking and addressing. So yeah, I'm really grateful that I already had that kind of foundation and was starting to build that toolkit, because I feel like I would be in a completely different place now if I hadn't already started to develop some of those tools and learn some of that kind of permission and language when I lost Gavin.
That, I apologize, but I forgot about that. So I've known Katy. When did we meet? Was it middle school, elementary school?
Yeah.
Like a long time ago. A long time ago. And now that you're saying that, yeah. And now I have like all these other questions that are coming up because I do so much inner child work and I'm doing a lot of inner child workshops. And so when you said that, it's so true because as a 5-year-old learning to grieve or even understanding what that is or loss, it's so different. And now here you are in a very similar circumstance with a man that's super close to you. Whoa.
Yeah. 30, almost exactly 30 years later.
I have goosies.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. My gosh. Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, did you find it triggering? Like now I'm all connected to this whole, let's go back to when you were 5 thing. Have you learned what have you discovered in this process of being reminded? Are you being brought back to that time? Are you being shown these opportunities of where there's still parts of you that weren't maybe healed or had fully felt into? Like, tell me more about that process for you.
Absolutely. I think there's been a huge, for one, I think there was a almost instant kind of recognition of like, I don't want to do things the same way this time. I don't want to kind of be in a place where I'm avoiding or packing down or not like addressing what's here. So even in the early days of shock and deep grief, there was this awareness of like, we need to move through this differently this time, and we need to actually move through it. And 100% in kind of like, starting to open those like closets and shine light in those shadow spaces. For sure, it has been a very parallel process of healing like me now and also healing like 5-year-old me.
Yeah. Can you tell us when you kind of really realized after Gavin's passing that your life had completely changed?
Yeah, I feel like it was small kind of things initially, especially when you go through something that like traumatic and grief that deep, like you're in shock for a long time and your body is kind of protecting you from the magnitude of what's happened, because I don't think our brains could fully absorb everything at once. I think also now that I'm kind of like in a different place and looking back on things, I think I was already starting to kind of move in a new life direction even before. So part of our kind of backstory is that Gavin and I had lived in Vancouver together for about 13 years. And then in spring of 2022, we sold our condo. We went and traveled in Europe for 3 months together. And then we drove across the country and we moved to Toronto and set up a totally new life and a new chapter here. And so there, of course, were pieces of that then to lose him like 6 months later was so unexpected and devastating, and meant that I was physically so far away from my support system. I knew a couple of people here. It started to make a few connections, but like most of my community is on the West Coast. So there was a really challenging element of that. And then there was also this piece of like, I'm so glad we did it. I'm so happy that we had that trip and we had that time and we made the move. And I think if we had been in a position where we were still in Vancouver and just kind of talking about all of these things as hypotheticals, I would have had a lot more regret, and it would have been a lot more challenging to kind of like process that side of the loss and the grief.
Right. Right. And what beautiful memories to be able to look back on as well of your time together. Totally. That's so special to have that time you were able to
and
do it.
So many photos from that trip, and it's really, really special. So so I worked in corporate interior design for about 12 years. And I obviously took time away kind of in traveling and moving to Toronto. And then I set up my first job interview for a firm here, probably around September, October, 2022. And the day that I set it up, I had my first panic attack. And now looking back on it, it was totally my body being like, this is not the right path. This is not where you are meant to be going. This is an opportunity to like reset and move in a different direction. So my sort of like separation from that career path had already started before losing Gavin. And I feel like his death really just accelerated everything, because it was such a like in my face thing of like, time is so short. What are your values? What are your priorities? Where do you actually want to be? And I was like, this career is not it. So
it's wild how events like that happen in our life, and all of a sudden we're gaining this new insight and clarity to things that we didn't even know we wanted or we needed.
Yeah.
That's super powerful. But then did you feel as though like now you're grieving this whole other identity of who you've been? Not that someone's career is a representation of how they identify, but oftentimes it is. And I'm wondering, was that similar for you too? It's like, holy shit, like you're going through this entire new rebirth of a new life entirely, like location, partner, career.
Yeah.
Like it's, again, I get goosebumps thinking about it, because that's such a huge, huge transition and so many big things all at once. Is it easier, do you feel, to be doing it all at once and at the same time? Or I guess
I don't know. It had kind of reached a point where it just didn't feel optional. And I think the thing is, whether it is on like the same scale as what I'm moving through right now or not, I think there is always, when you experience that kind of really significant and traumatic loss and grief, I think of it almost as kind of this like boulder falling in a pond. And there are all of these other ripples that come out of it that are other smaller deaths and smaller losses and grief that is connected to that. And, whether you decide to change careers or not, there is a death of the version you were with that person. There are friendships that don't survive, that don't know how to show up for that grief. There are family members that don't know how to show up for that grief. So there are always these sort of like aftershock things that come with it that is, can be incredibly challenging to move through, because you're still in this massive thing and you're like, and now I've got to deal with this and this and this. And yeah, it can feel really overwhelming.
And so how did you discover the power of poetry? Like what led you to writing in all of that?
I think, it's interesting kind of going back to that like inner child connection. Like writing was always something I had done as a kid, and anytime I had even like homework assignments where there was that component, I always went like above and beyond and would like craft these wild stories and things. And then somewhere along the way, it just kind of fell off, and it was, like, oh, you need to maybe focus on career or what is like a viable way to make money and whatever. And so starting to get into poetry really felt like, for one, it was an incredibly powerful way for me to process my grief and to move through what I was feeling and what I was navigating. And then it also felt like a kind of homecoming in a way, that it was something that was familiar and comforting and I was good at. And then the other really beautiful piece of it is that Gavin also wanted to be a writer, and he was actually taking classes at U of T when we moved here. And so there was sort of a closeness and a connection I feel to him in writing too. And initially it wasn't something I was planning to share with anyone. It was just a personal tool. And I think, I also wrote in journals, and like there were many different types of writing that I was doing. But for me, poetry felt like this sort of really bite-sized thing where I could just focus on a specific piece, a specific moment, a specific emotion, and just capture that. And like most of them I've just written on my phone. My notes app is this wild thing of like the depths of my soul, and then 5 bananas and oat milk. And like, it's like,
yes, I so relate to that. Mine's the exact same.
Yeah.
Like I so relate to that.
Yeah. So that's really how it started. And part of it was just, your phone is like always there. It's always available wherever I was. I could just kind of like put in whatever was sort of coming up at the moment. And then eventually I got to a place where I started feeling this sort of call to share it. And I thought, maybe this is something that could help connect me with other people who have gone through similar loss. Maybe this is a way to help give other people a voice when they don't have the words and the language to sort of express how they're feeling. Like writing for me comes fairly easily, but I know that that's not the case for everyone. And I've received beautiful messages from friends saying how much they kind of connect to what I've written and how much it resonates with them. And so, that's such a beautiful thing, that because grief can also be such an isolating experience. And so I think having that way to kind of reach out and connect to people through my words has been really, really powerful for me.
Yeah, a lot of what you're saying really resonates. Reflecting back to your experience when you were 5 and saying, I don't want to experience grief the same way. I don't want to do it the same way. I can relate to that. I lost somebody really close to me, February of 2023. So it was almost like when you started sharing publicly these poems, I was grieving as well, a different, obviously, kind of relationship. But I felt so connected to your writing, and there was a lot of isolation for me in particular with this particular person, just because I'm not a part of their world or their family or their friend group anymore. But her and I were still very, very connected. And I also remember going through that and thinking, and as you know, Brent passed about 11 years ago, and him and I were super, super close. For those of you listening, this is somebody we went to high school with. And we were really, really close. And I remember, that was 11 years ago. So how did we deal with that then? Well, we drank for, you got together in big groups and you got drunk and you partied, and that's how you were thinking you were grieving and getting through it. And
totally. This sort of piece of knowing that you wanted to be in community, but then also so much numbing and escaping. And it's
Yeah. And so it's this, I was well, I feel like I'm supposed to go and have a glass of wine or a bottle, but that actually just feels so out of integrity with what my body truly needs. And so for me, but I'm kind of an adult for both of those experiences for me. Whereas with you, it's at 5 years old, you're not, what are you turning to? Is it whatever's being given to you or what you're being told to do, as opposed to what may truly be right for you individually?
Totally. And I think especially when you're a little kid like that, your brain is very far from fully developed, and you are the center of the universe. And so there was so much in that where I was, blamed myself for what had happened and all of these different things, where it's just you don't have the framework to really sort of understand what's going on. And so you make assumptions and you make, that sort of inlays these thoughts and ideas that can be very far from fact, but it feels true and it feels real. And it takes a lot to kind of break those things apart and rewrite that narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you feel, if at all, that poetry's kind of transformed your understanding of grief and loss? Has it, or do you feel it's more just helped you embody what you're feeling more?
I guess both, because I think in giving yourself permission to embody it more, it totally changes your relationship to it, where you give yourself permission to actually sit with it and say, this is here now. This is here forever. How do I make space for this, kind of missing piece that I have to learn how to kind of mend my heart around? I think in writing, there's been so much processing and so much. I think what's really come out, I have so much awareness now, and part of it I think is because of writing. But in the there's no binary in grief. There's everything, and you can be bawling your eyes out and then laughing 2 minutes later. You can have days of crazy highs and lows. And I think especially in the beginning, it's not that any of it's easy, but in some ways it's easier to sit in the negative emotions because it feels more correct. I should be sad. I should be angry. I should be feeling these things. And when you start to get to a place where you're able to kind of see these little glimmers of joy, it can be really hard to let that in. And so for me, that was also kind of writing through allowing space for all of those things to coexist simultaneously has been really important and really impactful.
Yeah, I understand that. And I think a lot of people resonate with that, right? Like they really have a hard time, just in my experience, with friends and other people I've known in my community that have experienced it. It's true. There's this really heavy feeling of guilt whenever there's like that shed of light or happiness or joy. And it can be really hard to move through that roller coaster and be accepting of it. Right.
Yeah.
And were there any emotions that came up for you that weren't expected, like that you really didn't expect to feel into?
I guess I think, it's a very sort of common thing in our society for women to just not feel anger, to not allow it to be there, to not give permission to it. And I still am so angry. There was so much rage and anger around the situation, around other kind of ripple effect situations and what was happening with my immediate family and people that really didn't have the capacity to show up for me the way that I would hope. And so, yeah, figuring out, and also like the physicality of grief to feel these things, not just like in your kind of brain and but like physically through your whole body, to feel this anger and this sort of like pulsing rage. Sometimes like I started going to boxing because it was a way to just like let that bag have it for an hour and really kind of like physically move through what you're feeling as well.
Especially as women, like, growing up, I can't speak for you, but for me, and I think a lot of women resonate with this, is that we're told to kind of like sit down, be quiet, be good girls, right? And then you're shown love or affection or attention for when you're behaving. Yeah. And it's a sneaky one. And I think so many women need to find opportunities and safe places to feel into that. I went to a women's retreat in May, and I was convinced that there was an anger day where we really focused on processing anger and what that looked like. And I was convinced that I would spend that day thinking about a particular current event in my family with a sibling that is so frustrating. And I was like, oh, this is like, this person's probably going to come up and I'm going to like let out all this anger and I can go back and handle the situation with more empathy and understanding and care. And what ended up coming up was like my high school boyfriend.
Yeah. All of these things that you just have, that get kind of just tamped down because you're not supposed to feel that way. And like, I could not believe how like deep down I was still so angry at that person for cheating on me and for treating me the way that I was treated. And I just like, honestly, all this time, like I would have put money on the fact that like I was good and have been over it for a really long time. But like the body really does remember. And it's just a testament to how little we are really feeling into it and embodying it. And I'm really moving in that direction with my clients of that somatic approach to healing. It's like, and that's why when you're writing, I find that, I don't know if this is same for you, but I will like start feeling something and I'll really try to like, okay, label the feeling, sit in the discomfort of the feeling. And then I'll try and write about what the feeling makes me like. Is it quick? Is it stormy? Does it have a color? Does it have a scent? Like really describe it. And through that process, that is what true healing feels like. And it sounds like that's exactly what your writing is offering you an opportunity for as well, or that you're seeking out for yourself. Totally. And I also have been really, just kind of fascinated by somatics, and that this is sort of a new thing that I wasn't aware of before. I attended a workshop online a few months ago, and the facilitator was talking about how in our brain to body communication, it's actually only like 20% brain to body and 80 body to brain. Yeah. So as much as writing is an incredibly necessary tool and a like helpful tool, it's not the only thing that needs to happen, because you need to find ways to physically tell your body, like, you are safe, you are okay, you can, you got this. So yeah.
You need to feel to heal.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And I think that's also why, like in talk therapy, I think for so long that was really effective. And I think that's why we're seeing such a shift now. We're seeing such a change. And it is, people are moving more and more away from talk therapy, or they're seeking additional assistance. And they're actually really truly doing the healing and doing the work that relieves not just their mind, but their body. And we're all becoming so much more conscious.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, for me, talk therapy is still a huge part of my like healing journey, but it is not the only thing. Just, writing is not the only thing. Therapy is not the only thing. But when you put all of these pieces together, it starts to become this really beautiful framework that can support like all aspects of what you're going through.
So share with me a little bit more about what you are doing, to help yourself. So it's not just writing, it's not just talk therapy. What other things have you done over the last year and a half? And maybe this could provide insight or support or help to others who are experiencing the similar things that maybe they haven't tried yet. Is there anything else that you've been doing that you found helpful?
Yeah. So the other big ones for me have been yoga and active breath work. Breath work in particular, I don't know if this is something you're familiar with. Some of its other names are holotropic breath work. It has been truly life-changing. And I think it is one of those things that is a deeply sort of somatic release. You can go in with an intention if you want, but it really is just giving the body space and time to move energy and move emotion. And it can be incredibly powerful. I generally have like pretty vivid sort of visualizations and like, it's really like, I never know what's going to show up when I go into a session. I'm lucky here that I have a couple of friends who are really beautiful breathwork facilitators. And so I go to their classes pretty much whenever they're offering them. And it's just like, breathing through what the body is holding and needs to let go of.
Yeah, I think everybody needs to try breathwork. It's one of those things where you're like, this is silly. I mean, I thought when I first started doing it, I was like, this is silly. This is ridiculous. But then you get into it and the way you feel afterwards and what happens during it's life-changing.
Yeah.
Wholeheartedly. Yeah. I want to, I really want to read one of my fave poems that you wrote. And this is, I don't know, for some reason, I feel like you're going to be surprised at the one I've chosen, but maybe not at all. And the reason why I chose this particular poem is because reading it, I felt like I went on a journey of so many different things. It was the entire human experience. And so I want to read it. I have it here. It's called New Soap.
Oh.
I bought new soap today, the expensive kind, the one in architectural magazines that tells visitors in your guest bathroom, you fucking made it. I bought new soap today, and it felt like I cheated on you. I bought the soap you couldn't use, the one you were allergic to, and part of my heart broke a little more, and part of my brain said, fuck you. If you were still here, I wouldn't need the expensive soap to lie to visitors in my guest bathroom and tell them I fucking made it. That like makes me emotional reading it. Girl.
I think that's the first time I've heard someone else read my work. That's really powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like so powerful. Reading that, it's like, it brings me through so much. I want to hear what it was for you, what came for you. Was that something that like after you bought the soap, you sat in that, seeing it there? Like for me, it just, I see forward movement. I feel healing. There is shame. There is guilt. There's sadness, but then there's also empowerment and progress and individuality and coming home to self. It's just, and then there also feels like avoidance. And then there also feels like acting like everything is fine because that's what we've been told to do all our lives. And that's what society expects of us. And God forbid we like make someone feel uncomfortable if our lives weren't like everything is just, fucking great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I mean, and I could read 100 of your poems and feel connected to them. I really am blown away by your ability to write, and to make people feel. But what for you, like in that specific one, was that like you bought the soap and that came to you? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, I totally remember writing that one. And I had a couple of really good friends from Vancouver who were coming out to visit. And so I was doing all of the things to, be a good hostess and, scour the house, clean everything. I also, in the way that our kind of like roles and responsibilities in my marriage with Gavin, like he was the one who was really more of the sort of like home caretaker. So he did most of the cleaning. There was just the way that we divided things was really not a traditional kind of like gender stereotype of our roles in the most beautiful way. So when he died, I hadn't cleaned a bathroom in 15 years. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I don't want to do this. I don't know how to do this. I'm like watching YouTube videos on how to scrub a toilet. Like, I just was like, so, all of this like frustration and newness and anger. And so that was all part of that was, getting this guest bathroom ready for friends to come and be here and then putting the soap out and just being like, okay, yeah, like what's going on here? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I just feel like it really is a really beautiful, all encompassing of there's so much there. There's so much there to unpack. Yeah. It just hits every inch of me. What, if any, advice do you have for people who are experiencing similar loss or that are grieving?
I think there's a couple of things that have been really, really helpful and necessary for me. The first one is to, as much as you're able to, remove judgment from the emotions that are coming up and give yourself permission for any and all of them to be there. You're going to feel sorrow and, sadness. Obviously, there will be anger. There will be also, there can be joy and there can be laughter. And I think, especially if it's something where there's been maybe a prolonged illness or, there can be relief. There can be all of these things that we don't necessarily by default want to allow or give ourselves permission for. And so I think that's the biggest thing, just whatever shows up, sit with it, say, welcome, you're allowed to be here. Yeah. And then the other one, which is advice a friend had shared with me, was that not everyone in your life is going to be able to kind of show up in all facets, and to sort of figure out different ways that different people will have the capacity to support you. I have a good friend who basically would just send me like Instagram memes, and that was sort of what she was able to offer, and then other people that I could have the more sort of like gut-wrenching, heart-pouring conversations with. And so kind of like leaning on your network in ways that also align with what their capacity is.
Right. Letting go of expectations.
Yes. And learning to be your own biggest advocate. The like crash course in boundary setting that this has been for me. I think that's another thing that is, kind of millennial women. It's, you want to be this like people pleaser, say yes to everything, and you cannot, and you have to let it go, and you have to stand up for yourself. And, the really challenging thing is that we hope that people could kind of read our minds and show up for us exactly how we want, but nobody else is in our brain. And even people who really want to be there and have the capacity to support you are probably still going to need some guidance in what that looks like and how to show up. So I think, learning to, be your own biggest advocate, and also in that know that everything that you need is okay, and that saying no to as much as you need to is okay. And
this year for me, my coach and I have really been honing in on like, ask for what you need. That's kind of been the theme. Like even during our sessions, she'll be like, Lauren, are you asking for what you need? Because as a recovering people pleaser, I have to work really hard every day to just because I'm extroverted and just because I love to talk, it doesn't mean I'm actually talking about the things that I truly need. Mm-hmm. I'm just making noise sometimes. And there's a discomfort in leaning into that and learning how to ask for what you need from your friends. And over this year, there have been moments where I have been really proud of myself for saying to friends, certain friends, like, okay, this is exactly what I need from you. And then speaking to your point, the not having too much of an expectation that even though you feel you've clearly outlined what it is you need from them, that when you don't get it, that you can still be the steward of your own healing, or you can go and tap into self in order to provide that for yourself. Because even with explicit directions, sometimes people don't have the capacity.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, as beautiful and necessary as a support system is, it's you. You are the one who has to show up for you. You are the one who needs to do the work. You are the only one who knows what that healing needs to look like for your own kind of path and processing. And yeah, it can be, I think, both incredibly empowering and then also very sort of like daunting and isolating at the same time. It's like, yes, this is me. And like, oh shit, this is only me. Like,
yeah, I think it's important to remember that no matter where we go, we're always taking ourselves with us.
Yeah. I remember when Gavin and I left Vancouver and we were on our big trip through Europe, we traveled so much in that 3 months. Like, I don't think we stayed anywhere longer than a week. And so we were constantly like on the go and in all of these different cities and places. And it was so incredible. And it was exhausting. And by the end of the trip, we had 2 weeks in Berlin at the end of it. There might have been a couple of big nights at the club. And so one of our last days, we're in this laundromat in Berlin. And I just had like a full kind of breakdown where I was like, I just want to go home. We don't have a home. What is home? And it kind of kicked off this whole like existential questioning of the idea of home. And so then there was this kind of rewriting of that narrative that like, okay, well, maybe home is not a place. Maybe home is when you are in relationship to the people who mean the most to you. And then Gavin died. So now home is gone again. And what does that look like now? And where do we pivot from here? And then finally I was like, right. So if home isn't me, if home isn't here, then it's nowhere, because everything else can change, can be taken away, essentially.
Yeah, I really feel that that's something that it's wild. You know, my coach always says, like, your story is my story is your story. Our stories are everyone's stories. And it's so true. I'm not going through the same thing as you, but hearing you say that, it's so true. Like, home truly is within, and you have to go within to find everything. You can provide everything for yourself, that sense of home, the sense of love, the sense of affection, whatever it is that you're seeking, you have within you. And it's, you know, the more breath work and embodiment work that you do, the easier it becomes to access the feeling of that within you.
Totally.
It sounds like, I mean, and I didn't know you on an intimate level before, but it sounds like your relationship with yourself has really, truly evolved in this process quite a bit.
Hugely. It was, I had this really cool moment in therapy a few weeks ago. I was saying, you know, in some ways it feels kind of ironic that the universe has broken my trust so profoundly in this loss. And then I also have been leaning into that trust more in the last year than I ever have. And my therapist said, well, that's because what you're trusting is yourself. And she was like, you are the universe. Like, they're not separate. And I was just like,
Wow.
Blown away. Yeah.
Wow. Is there anything else that you would like to share? Is there anything else that you think would be helpful for others? Anything that's coming up for you at all?
I guess there's a couple of really beautiful books that I have read as part of this that have been incredibly helpful as part of my healing. The first one is It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine. Incredible book for learning how to give yourself permission for the mess that is grief. And then the other one is The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Dr. Francis Weller. That's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. And he speaks so much to what we have lost culturally in terms of community and ritual and practices around grief. And I have felt that so much, as we touched on already. There's so many things that like people just don't know what to do and they don't know how to show up. And he has gone around and studied different cultures that still have really like strong and beautiful grief practices and kind of watched like what they do within community. And it's so incredible to think that there is another option there where we could feel less alone and less isolated on this journey. And so I'm still very much in the process of kind of navigating where I'm going from here. But I absolutely am feeling called to start building something that is in kind of community facilitating and connection building. And I think grief is absolutely going to be a component of that because we just all need more connection around it. And everyone has a grief story of some kind. To be human is to grieve. So
absolutely. And so in saying that, where can people follow you? Where can people go to support you? What is the Instagram account that you want people following if they want to read more of your poetry? I'll include it all in the show notes as well, but first,
So poetry, you can find me on Instagram at Katy Maclean Poetry. And then I also have a Substack that is Katy's Open Journal.
I've really enjoyed our chat today. I feel like I've learned a lot. And it's also just really nice to connect with you. You're such an inspiration and have been for me personally. And I know a lot of other people as well, since you did start sharing your journey. And I look forward to continuing to follow and see what comes and see where you go and what you create. And, just know too that you're not alone and that, we're all here with you as well. And I'm just very appreciative for your time today and for your sharing. And it's just been really nice to connect with you.
Thank you so much. I feel the same. It's been really nice to connect and, looking forward to continuing to build connection.
Absolutely.